everyone. Welcome to another episode of Divided Films, the podcast where we talk about movies that audiences and critics do not agree on. With me, as always, is my co-host Keith.
Hello!
And returning to the podcast today, our guest, Adam Volerich. Welcome back, Adam.
Hello. Good to be here.
Adam is actually not just a guest today, but he has lent us his know-how and experience with remote podcast recordings, which is what we must do in this age of COVID-19. So thank you, Adam, for making this remote recording possible.
You're helping us move
no
on
problem.
up.
Happy to do it.
You're helping us move on up.
So we're
Hey, man, we're all in this together.
exactly. We got to help each other out. So much appreciated, and we're really excited to get back into this. So we picked a movie that I think is near and dear to all of us, but is actually divided. It is the 2002 comic book movie Spiderman, directed by Sam Raimi and starring Tobey Maguire. A couple of factoids about this movie that I'll pull up here. This movie falls into the category of having a positive score with critics and 90% approval on Rotten Tomatoes, and a mixed score from audiences. So that's 67%.
How dare they?
I was really shocked by that, but let's try to figure out why that is. So the critics' consensus on Rotten Tomatoes: not only does Spider-Man provide a good dose of web-swinging fun, it also has a heart thanks to the combined charms of director Sam Raimi and star Tobey Maguire. So what did you guys think when you found out this was a divided film? I know I was surprised and actually kind of upset. I thought everyone loved this movie.
I was quite shocked. In thinking about it, like, I feel like the way that this podcast sources audience score is on the Rotten Tomatoes website, right? So my assumption is then that score is not necessarily purely reflective of what the reaction was at the time of the release, but therefore also the legacy of the film. And that to me then is like sort of like the big red flag where I go, oh no, like people don't like this movie anymore?
Yeah, is it that it hasn't aged well? Or maybe, we've had so many other Spider-Man movies come out. Do they think that this one just pales in comparison to what has come out since then? I mean, I'm sure we'll get into all the other Spider-Man movies we've had over the last 20 years, but I still think this one...
I think we have to.
Yeah, you really do. But I still think this one, like, stands out as one of the top ones for me.
I agree, yeah.
I was shocked.
What do you think,
Well, there's so many... I can't believe I'm saying it for this movie, but there's so many layers to this movie that all funnel into me loving it. Like, my reaction to it then, my love of my film criticism to it, and also the legacy and the memes that led to it. But when you said that this film was divided, I instantly thought that critics were the ones that were harsh on it. Going through... And I not only did a deep dive on Rotten Tomatoes, I went down the rabbit hole. I did homework on this. Not saying I do it. I do my homework on all the movies that we cover, but this one particularly has a rabbit hole. Like Roger Ebert, one critic that we like quoting, was a 2.5. He was very meh about it. 2.5 out of 4. And going through the deep dive, of course, you go through the looking at audiences' reactions to it. Then and now, everyone you get an overwhelming amount of, I love this movie, this is my favorite, this is the one that started it all, and you get a few, it stinks and I don't like it.
I love that line.
You do, and I did, you do find a good amount of,
like kind of people who are like not just in the middle about it, I guess.
I think it garners a lot of 2.5s and 3s out of 5s and 4s. I think I could totally understand their criticisms, but that's not stopping me from loving it.
Well,
Well, no, of course
something
not.
I've heard some of the detractors say, at least like in person, I didn't see too many comments on Rotten Tomatoes about this, is I think just some people don't like Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker.
Yes.
And looking at his performance, I guess what maybe some of the other Spider-Man movies capture that this franchise doesn't is the humor of Peter Parker. I guess Tobey Maguire is maybe a little serious as Peter Parker. They focus more on the nerdy, awkward part of it and not so much as the sarcastic jokester that the comic book fans know.
Well, the thing about that, though, that I immediately disagree with is that actually Spider-Man is the mouthy one. Peter Parker is not.
Oh.
And that's very true in this movie. Like, he's calling Green
Gobby,
Goblin
yeah.
Gobby, which is, like, just ridiculous. And he's making jokes all the time when he's got the suit on, which I think is part of the charm of this movie. It's part of what makes it work so well. And I know, and we're gonna have to discuss sort of like the legacy of Spider-Man movies while talking about this one. But like, I think one of the things that like carries over into the Tom Holland performance is that they sort of lean into this similar sort of thing where it's like Peter Parker is like, he's got a lot of heart and he is like nerdy and awkward. So like the Holland version of that character ends up being like very sweet, but Spider-Man has still got a mouth on him, you know?
Maybe that's part of how the suit gives him more strength, more confidence that as Peter Parker he wants to have, and these powers in the suit just are maybe the part of him that he's always wanted to be. So a part of this movie kind of is wish fulfillment too. He beats up the bully,
absolutely.
He gets the girl, or maybe not, kind of at the end. But I feel like that aspect of it is very relatable. I think.
Yes, I think you're tapping into like why Spider-Man works, and like for me, like why like Spider-Man is like my guy, he's my favorite superhero, and it comes down to the fact that like he's so relatable. He is a normal guy, and actually he's less than a normal guy, right? Because he's nerdy in a time and like a generation where being nerdy actually meant something. It means being uncool. It's during a time period where if you study hard, you suck. If you like things and you don't like them, it's not ironic liking something. You legitimately like something, you care about it, you give a shit, you suck, fuck you. Like that was the sort of generational opinion for like what, like from the 60s until I want to say until like the 2010s.
2010s. In fact, I think that's something that 21 Jump Street kind of captures, right? Is the sort of shift away from cool being cool to like ironically nerdy being cool. And this, Peter Parker kind of suffers in that past version of what's cool and uncool.
Although even the nerds do not like him in this movie. I did.
On the bus.
I sent.
Yes, on the bus.
I sent you a text when I was watching this, JJ. I'm like, what did he do that even what did he do? It's like he told on the drug dealer in school that everyone hates him. The bus driver hates him. Like
even the bus driver won't stop for him.
Yeah,
like,
the bus
every
driver
time.
messed up. Everyone bullies him.
That is messed up.
It's very funny. I mean, but like all of that is like why I relate to Spider-Man, and I'm guessing that, or not Spider-Man. I relate to Peter Parker. I feel like you have to acknowledge that like Peter Parker and Spider-Man, while being the same body and mind, are kind of two different people, and he's usually performed as such. But I want to get back to that like wish fulfillment thing you said earlier, JJ, where it's like like if you're like a nerdy guy of a certain generation who wears glasses and like gave a shit about stuff and was given a hard time for doing so, you look at Peter Parker and you're like, that's who I see myself as, and boy, I wish I could do the other thing. I wish I could be Spider-Man. I wish I could like have that strength. It's a real sort of thing where and a thing where I really personally dig into it. Like I have a lot of like physical, like chronic health issues, and then I look at someone like Spider-Man, and he's like, especially in this movie, is presented as like so scrawny, and then he gets the bite, and all of a sudden all of that melts away and is replaced by this like real physical strength, and you just see the freedom that comes with that physical strength.
Yep.
Obviously, the dark side of the wish fulfillment we'll have to get into is the classic line with great power comes great responsibility. But it's just, I mean, I think that's what makes this character so special to me and to many people.
And the bite happens fairly early on in the movie, but I think they do a good job just establishing very quickly who this kid is and like the world he lives in. I mean, so many of those quick moments in the beginning I feel like are relatable almost in a cringy way. Like when Mary Jane waves past him and he thinks she's waving at him, like little moments like that. It's like, it's almost too relatable. It's like, ooh, I can't even like watch because I feel like I've had those kind of embarrassing, awkward moments growing up. And this movie is like tapping into that almost a little too well.
Through no fault of its own, this movie is definitely of the time. Like this is a early 2000, if you were to say what year this movie came out, just look at Macy Gray.
Oh yeah, Macy Gray at the concert
Yeah.
there.
Well, and the awful credits song, that like new metal. What is it? Creed
No,
or is it Nickelback? Who is
it's
it? It's one of
Nickelback.
them.
But
It's Nickelback,
and
right? Yeah.
Matchbox 20, I believe, did the Spider-Man. But also having title credits in the beginning, like 5-minute long title credits. You really don't
Which
see
I
a movie.
enjoyed.
Okay, well, if Danny Elfman writes you a score, you make an opening
Oh,
credit
and
sequence.
this
like,
might
that's,
be
that's how
this
it
might be
goes.
my favorite Danny Elfman score. It's so recognizable, and it just
It's
when
really
you think
good.
about
Yeah.
it, you just think of those amazing sequences of Spider-Man, swinging through the streets of Manhattan. It's so iconic
Running.
now. I feel, like you taking the thing out.
I would argue that like the Spider-Man 2 score is ever so slightly
I would
better.
say that too. Yeah.
There's a couple. I mean, it's like I know it's the same thing basically, but like there's just a couple of like new themes in that score that like I think outdo this one. But I don't know if either of you have played the recent Spider-Man game for PlayStation 4, which again we can sort of talk about more in depth when we sort of describe the legacy of the character. But a thing I was doing for a while was just playing that game, which has incredible web swinging through New York stuff for you to do, and just putting on the Spider-Man 2 score in the background and just like feeling the like the rush of like being Spider-Man. It's such a good time.
To be fair too, everything in Spider-Man 2 is like a bit better than the first one, so
Yeah.
it makes sense that the score also would be elevated to match everything else.
Yeah, and we should at some point we should like rank
I
Spider-Man.
definitely want to get into that too towards the end.
Yeah.
I should have done that
but-
before. That's tough. That's tough now with Spider-Verse.
If Tobey Maguire though is maybe a point of contention, I feel like the rest of the cast, like Willem Dafoe, I feel like everyone loves in this movie.
He's so good. He knows exactly what movie he's in.
Yeah.
Like he gives it this incredible like sinister feeling while also tapping into the sort of like heartfelt and like campy nature of like a Sam Raimi film. Like he's doing
was a
It's
good-
really great.
It was a good mix of it was a good mix of Sam Raimi, like Sam Raimi got to flex his horror muscles with Willem Dafoe, with the Green Goblin, and that was such a perfect mix with Willem Dafoe. It's surprising that he wasn't the first choice. It's surprising that
Who else was the first choice?
Who was the first choice for
all our
Goblin?
other creepy character actors, John Malkovich, Nick.
Who he wanted to bring back in the fourth movie as Vulture.
The lizard should have been the villain. They set that guy up to be the villain throughout the whole franchise.
Yeah.
But Nicolas Cage, Bill Paxton, Mel Gibson. I think Mel Gibson.
Paxton could have done
Mel
it.
Gibson was up for he was up for Batman in Keaton's day. John Travolta and De Niro, and the role was originally intended to be played by Billy Crudup, but he dropped out.
That's so interesting because Billy Crudup was also supposed to be Hulk in Ang
Really?
Lee's Hulk, which is why the CG Hulk in that movie doesn't look like Eric Bana. It's because he was modeled after
I
Billy
didn't know
Crudup.
that.
That's really crazy.
Yeah.
It's like the
So,
Jack
well-
Frost snowman being supposed to be
That
George
came to mind,
Clooney.
too.
Yeah, that's the first thing that
right,
came to
yeah.
mind.
Well, Willem Dafoe, I'm glad is in this movie because I really like Willem Dafoe in almost everything he's in. I
Yeah.
even saw not too long ago Speed 2 Cruise Control, and it was like the only redeeming quality of that movie. But
I've never seen that one. I got to see that.
it's really bad and really dumb. But Willem Dafoe is like so over the top. It's like classic Dafoe. But in this, yeah, you're right. He hits all the right moments, and as the Goblin, he's having fun. But even as Norman Osborn, I feel like there's like he captures like the more subtle parts of that because. Yeah,
Yes.
Norman Osborn before the experiment is actually kind of a nice guy and could have been like a good mentor to Peter Parker, which I feel like is part of the Peter Parker tragedy is all these potential father figures get taken away
Yeah.
from him.
Always.
Yeah, and so it's kind of I think that makes the character more interesting. He's as does Norman Osborn, he doesn't seem like that bad of a guy, and then it's like a Jekyll and Hyde sort of performance towards the middle.
Oh yeah, well it's absolutely they're doing Jekyll and Hyde. There's no question about that. But I would disagree a little bit that Norman Osborn is a totally good and normal guy before he becomes Green Goblin because he's still like kind of like a bloodthirsty businessman, and when his, head of science is like, actually, this is incredibly dangerous, and we need to go back to the drawing board. He is like
Back to formula.
Back to formula.
Back to
Like
formula.
he's like before he becomes Goblin, he's ready to kill that guy. Also, if we could acknowledge for a moment, and this is this kind of leads into my like main contention with the MCU Spider-Man films, which I enjoy watching, but just generally kind of have some beefs with. The villain of this film, Norman Osborn, is a weapons manufacturer. And what the thing he's trying to sell is he's trying to sell technology to the U.S. military, which I think is very sort of like a post 9/11 thing. Like I think that's really cool that that's a part of this movie. But the idea that Norman Osborn is actually like, oh, he's like a nice guy, like I have huge beef with, because the dude is trying to sell drugs to the military to create an army of super soldiers, as well as like weapons technology, which presumably they're going to be using in like the war on terror.
Yeah, nice on the surface, maybe. Then and then deep down, he's like more.
The person he is nice to is Peter Parker.
Yeah.
He's fucking horrible to his own son.
True.
As of today, Oscorp Industries has surpassed Quest Aerospace as the principal supplier to the United States military. In short, ladies and gentlemen of the board, costs are down, revenues are up, and our stock has never been higher.
Wonderful news, Norman. Wonderful. As a matter of fact, it's the reason we're selling the company.
What?
Yes, Quest Aerospace is recapitalizing in the wake of the bombing. Expanding. They made a tender offer we can't ignore.
Why wasn't I told?
The last thing they want is a power struggle with entrenched management.
The deal is off if you come with it. The board expects your resignation in 30 days.
But you can't do this to me.
I started this company. You know how much I sacrificed?
This movie is, to me, like the post 9/11 movie, by the way. Like,
Yeah.
all the teaser trailers, yeah.
There's even a deleted scene where Spider-Man captures like these guys getting away in a helicopter who like robbed a bank or something in a web that he spun between the Twin Towers. And I think that might have been the scene where they reveal the costume, because there's no real...
It was the first teaser trailer for the film. I remember seeing it in theaters. And then literally, like, I remember a week after 9/11, and like, we were 10 years old back then. I remember specifically like my parents telling me, "Oh, they're like recutting Spider-Man."
Well,
I was just like, "Whoa!" Like
the bridge on
totally
this,
rethink of it.
the stuff on the scene on the bridge was reshot. Like, America, like, you knock one of us, you knock them all. Like, you mess with one of us, you mess with the whole city. That was a recut.
Which at the time is like, from an audience perspective. Now I think it's like a little bit like almost too cheesy.
He
but
lands on.
I disagree.
I appreciate the sentiment.
A thing that has been happening to me a lot, and not that I want to instantly date this episode, but we're in the middle of this quarantine during a global pandemic. I live in Manhattan. I'm not able to go outside very often because I'm at risk if I get the virus, right? And so a thing that's been happening lately is that when I watch movies set in New York, a city I currently live in, I get such extreme nostalgia for this city, even though I'm sitting in it right now, that even like just wide shots of the skyline can bring a tear to my eye. Watching this Spider-Man movie a few days ago during all of this, during that scene, which, depending on what kind of mood I'm in, could be cheesy. Like, I was like jumping out of my seat, being like, "Ah!" Like, I was so in it. Like,
well, also I think there's a sense of pride to, anytime you see a movie that takes place in New York City, and I also like recognizing all the different locations that like the Daily Bugle is a Flatiron building, and I think Oscorp is like the Bank of China on Bryant Park, right? Is that's right? I recognize. I mean, that's a little more of an obscure location, but still, like, as a New Yorker, it's fun to pick up on all those different locations. And
although to have one beef with the locational accuracy of the film, Peter Parker, who lives in Sunnyside, Queens, he says, I'm gonna go to the downtown library, and Uncle Ben is like, oh, I'll drive you to the downtown library, and it is like the main New York Public Library in like Midtown.
Yeah, that's something that totally went over my head as a kid when I had no idea, and now you watch and it's like, wait a minute, that's not right.
Yeah,
we had a similar beef when we went over Home Alone 2, and it's like, how is Kevin McAllister getting all over Manhattan one day? He's like in Central Park, then he's in Chinatown. It's most people, I guess, they don't really know New York geography, so you can totally get away with that sort of thing.
Also, Adam, one point I wanted to make back with why I love Spider-Man as well is, and you and JJ will might agree with me on this, is his rogue gallery, and I want to relate this to Green Goblin. I think Spider-Man to me is probably second to Batman in terms of his villains. That being said, Green Goblin was never a favorite of mine in the comics, and the TV show. I always preferred the Sinister Six, Mysterio, Sandman. I was excited for Sandman. Doc Ock to me was my favorite.
Doc Ock is my favorite because I feel like, you mentioned someone, I think one of you mentioned before, the sort of like surrogate father thing that we get in this film with Norman Osborn, and I think that the Otto Octavius version of that surrogacy is even more intense and more palpable, both in the comics, but especially in Spider-Man 2 and also in the Spider-Man video game, to the point where you are like literally heartbroken when they have to they know who each other are and they have to still fight and be at each other's throats. I don't think you get as much of that in this with Norman. Like when it comes time for Spider-Man to take him out, like you are sad, but you're not heartbroken.
I think there's more too of a confliction with Peter's friendship with Harry. I think in the moment, right at the end, right before he dies, I think you can see. I think the horror, the reaction Peter's having is not just that it's Norman; it's that this is his best friend's father. And that is obviously what we see continue in the second and third movies. And just to get into that, James Franco, what do you guys think of his performance in this? This for me was my introduction to James Franco.
I think it was for me as well. I think he's fine. Like he's good, but he doesn't need to do much. Not much is asked of him, and he does what he does well. I don't think that it's not like it's hardly like a memorable performance. I don't know. What do you
I think he gets better. I think he gets better as the movie. I personally love the third one for its own reasons, and I know it's bad, but it's really good bad. But I think he gets better as an actor, from the first movie to even the second movie. He undergoes like a good performance. But yeah, you're right. He's kind of he's doing the part well, and you're surrounded by other great performances. Like your dad is literally the scene stealer of the movie. That it just kind of like. Hey, you were a good Harry Osborn. I don't have any ill will. It didn't really stand out for me.
I think that maybe the point is in his character it's expanded upon in the sequel. So in this one, it's not quite his moment yet, but in the second and third ones is when he gets more of a chance to shape out the character. And then I'm just trying to go through the cast some more. J.K. Simmons is another fan favorite.
He's perfect. Yeah. I mean, he's so perfect that then when they need to do the character a second time, they're like, let's just get the same.
Like no one could replace
Far From Home.
You literally cannot replace him.
Yeah, no, that was great, and that was like a really great moment for fans at the end of the mid-credit scene, right in Far From Home, that they reveal him.
I
have to say though, that was a quick little tidbit here. That was overhyped for me in a way I wasn't sure yet. Dom. Had seen Far From Home before me.
I saw it with him we were at a press screening for it, like 2 weeks before it came out.
Yeah, he had seen it before me. And when we were talking before I had seen it, he hyped it up. He's like, there's a scene in the credits that's the most amazing thing that's ever happened in all of the MCU. You're gonna love it. It's beyond what you could possibly imagine. I'm like, what is like Deadpool gonna show up? Is like what's gonna happen? He's like, I can't say, but you can't even imagine. It's so amazing. So I went to see it, and almost the whole movie, I'm just like, just get to this end credits scene already, because Dom built it up so much, and then it's J.K. Simmons. I'm like, oh, that's cool, but it was hyped up way too much that it was actually kind of a letdown. So it was a nice surprise, but not maybe as amazing as some other people thought.
And it's another thing.
It's
It's an amazing thing that he also, no one was really their first choice for this movie. The studio didn't want Tobey Maguire. Elizabeth Dunst was kind of picked out from Kirsten Dunst. My bad. But a bunch of actresses tried out at the time. But even J.K. Simmons had to audition with like Hugh Laurie, Arlie Ermey, Dennis Farina, Michael Keaton, Bill Paxton. Even Stan Lee really wanted to play the character and auditioned.
Of course he did.
That would have been a really ironic of thing.
He's too like
nice,
small. Yeah,
I think that's his favorite character. Like Spider-Man,
guy.
I think Spider-Man is his favorite character, and he just loves, he just wanted to be a part of it.
I don't know if you would have been able to have the same like speed of his delivery as J.K. Simmons. Like his timing in that delivery, and as well as everyone else in that Daily Bugle, like little cast there. You also have Sam Raimi's brother.
Ted Raimi.
Yeah, Ted Raimi, and then Elizabeth Banks, and then just like their dynamic. I mean, that kind of, it's like a little sitcom that you get in every movie. These like funny little tidbits here. So that's a nice part of the campy charm that is Sam Raimi's bread and butter.
They're crap. Mega crap. I'll give you $200 for all of them.
That seems a little low.
Take them somewhere else then.
Sir, your wife says the tile you ordered for the foyer is out of stock.
Fella, we'll just put a rug there. Sit down. Give me that. I'll give you $300. That's a standard freelance fee. Tear up page 1, run that photo instead.
Headline?
Spider-Man, hero or menace? Exclusive Daily Bugle photos.
Menace. He was protecting that armored car.
I'll tell you what, Atticus. You take the pictures, I'll make up the headlines, okay? All right? That okay with you?
Yes, sir.
Goody. Give this to the girl up front. She'll see you get paid.
I'd like a job, sir.
No jobs. Freelance. Best thing in the world for a kid your age. You bring me some more shots of that newspaper-selling clown, maybe I'll take him off your hands. But I never said you have a job.
But bring up Stan Lee. I was watching the special features for the film on the Blu-ray, and they have a little quick interview with Stan Lee talking about inventing Spider-Man. And he says that the way he invented Spider-Man was that he was hanging out in his office and he saw a fly on the wall. And he was like, wow, isn't that interesting that a fly can crawl up and down the wall? I should make a superhero that can do that. I'll call him Flyman. And then and then the next thing he says is, you know what? But then I realized that Flyman, not a very sexy name. No sex appeal to Flyman. So I thought to myself, what could be sexier? he's like, I thought about Bugman, Insect Man, Wall Man, Spider-Man. That's the one.
I like Wall Man. The man who's half wall, half man. And then when you say Flyman, it makes me think of Jeff Goldblum's The Fly.
Yeah,
like, at the end when he does the full transformation, that's coming to mind. Peter should be lucky he didn't turn into a full half human, half spider hybrid. You lucked out.
They wanted to.
He does in some stories.
Oh, really? Like he gets like 8 arms and...
I have an action figure. Actually, I have no idea where it is. In my childhood, I had an action figure that was based on an arc in the Spider-Man animated series where something happens to him and he literally grows like 6 more arms, and so he becomes like an 8-armed monster.
I remember
man.
that. Wow. I remember those episodes. Like it was like a gray spider. Yeah, I can't remember the reason why. I don't think he gets bit again. I don't remember either. But I remember the images vividly.
But it was cool though. You could squeeze the legs, and then all of his arms would go like this.
Oh, that's like they're all connected to each other.
They were, and yeah, sorry, no one listening to this, but it would just, you would squeeze the legs together, and all 6 of his arms would like curl around his body as though they were.
I thought he was giving quotations, like
quote unquote. I also had sort of a thing with a connection to The Fly watching this. When you see the little hairs growing out of his fingers, You know, like that gives him the power to crawl up walls. Which, in actuality, that and the spider sense, I think, in the comics are the only true physical parts of his powers, because the web slinging is like something he invents. In this movie, right, they kind of change that from the comics, where it's like an organic part
this
of
is
him.
the only, I believe this is the only version of Spider-Man where he has organic web shooters, which I know a lot of like people have a problem with. I don't have a problem with that. I know Raimi said his reason for doing so was he was like, in a film where so much suspension of disbelief is required, I thought that getting the audience to believe that a high school senior would invent mechanical web shooters was a bridge too far. Which I kind of get, and also it enables him to do this incredibly weird but like pretty effective like riff on like hormonal development and you know, I'm not gonna say the quiet part loud, but like you know we know what he's doing there, and I think it works.
Well, the one part where Aunt May, I think, like peeks into his room and there's webs everywhere.
Exactly.
I think that is like the illusion there. It's pretty on the nose.
I think with at the time, I went along with it, and I still like with the Sam Raimi trilogy, it works. But I'm very happy they even like the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. I think that was like a big point. Like he's making his own webs, and they went along with it with Tom Holland. And I think it only works for me in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, just because it works in the sequel too. It's all
in the sequel. It works even better when all of a sudden his powers aren't working, and he gets mid swing. All of a sudden, it's not working. I think that plays into it pretty well.
It's so good.
So with the humor of this movie, it has such a great charm, and I feel like this kind of humor is maybe what set the standard for a lot of other comic book sort of comedy that we saw even in like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A lot of sort of subversive humor where you kind of maybe like deflate a tense moment with something humorous, and a lot of like sarcastic sort of humor. I feel like the beat, at least, is something that you see a lot of other comic book movies take from. So this, I feel like without this Spider-Man movie and trilogy, you might not have gotten a lot of other comic book movies.
Well, I mean, without this movie, you definitely don't get other comic book movies, because this movie was just an unabashed commercial success. It was Sony's highest grossing film until like 2 years ago when the first Jumanji film came out, or 3 years ago, whenever that was. So like this movie doing gangbusters at theaters is why we're in the situation we're in now.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, you can credit Iron Man for like the second wave of that, but like Iron Man doesn't happen without this movie.
I
agree.
And a lot of comic book movies before this, like what did you have? I mean, people credit Spider-Man and X-Men, I think, or as like the beginning of like the 2000s era of comic book movies, because I guess before that in the 90s, I feel like comic book movies are pretty dark. And you had a lot of more obscure comic book movies adapted into film. I think it's interesting that, for example, like Blade was made into a movie before Spider-Man was.
Right. And it's interesting that you bring up sort of like this weird like nether zone where we have like these darker superhero movies, because I don't think you can really talk about Sam Raimi's Spider-Man without also giving a little shout out to Darkman. So before making this movie, Sam Raimi had always wanted to make a comic book film, and he was trying to get the rights to things like The Shadow and The Spirit, and at one point even Batman. Like he wanted to do his own superhero film, and no one would let him make one. So he just invented his own superhero movie, his own character, with the idea that it would be like this darker sort of creature or person. And Darkman ends up being kind of like a cross between like the Phantom of the Opera or like a Universal horror movie and a superhero movie. And it's also got elements of like noir movies and detective stories. It's a really wild, weird, dark, strange film that also has that kind of like Sam Raimi blend of like goofy horror and also a totally like unironic like heart at its center.
And that's why that's why his unabashed love for comics and Spider-Man, I think, is also his favorite, because at one point James Cameron, right before Titanic, he was supposed to direct his own weird Mary Jane and him having sex on the Brooklyn Bridge version of Spider-Man. And then he went away to do Titanic. And then Sony bought the rights, and they went through, like, Roland Emmerich was at one point like going to do it,
Yeah, and I saw Fincher was considered as
and
well.
he was going to do the death of Gwen Stacy. That was his. I'm kind of happy Fincher did not. Very, of course, talented director. I'm happy he didn't do it. Chris Columbus was going to do it, and then he said, no, I want to do the first Harry Potter. And then Sam Raimi came in, showed him all 25,000 versions of his comic book. And yeah, no, his horror background with love of superheroes, and just it's a combination of tone that just works for this movie. And yeah, this was the first movie to cross $100 million in a weekend. X-Men didn't do that, but I would say, yeah, this is the start of what we have now. Because they all tried to recreate it with Fantastic Four, Daredevil. Like, then they really started looking at properties, and then they bungled those. Hulk as well.
Fantastic Four came after this.
I'm sorry, I will not allow you to speak ill of Ang Lee's Hulk in my
that is
I love that movie.
That could be
I think
divided debate.
That is so divided. No. I only seen it once, and I would love to do a deep dive of it.
That movie has aged like wine. And part of why I say that is not only does that movie just rule on its own, it's a great film, but in a world where every like 3 months we get a new superhero movie, and they all, no shade to the MCU, I've seen every one of those movies. I've seen them all in theaters. I've enjoyed the vast majority of them. But they all feel like they all feel like they come from the same like factory pressing.
I get that.
Whereas, a movie like Hulk is so clearly the vision of one person who is trying something interesting. Like whatever you think of that movie, you at least have to admire it for its authorship and like its uniqueness. And I would say that basically when you look at like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the director is like the least important person involved in the making of any of those films, and that's not necessarily a problem. I'm just saying that like from like that sort of perspective, like there's not a lot of interesting things on display. And I think the 3 superhero franchises that actually you feel the presence of the director, the film is better because of who they've chosen. The film is more interesting because of who they've chosen. Are these Spider-Man films, Ang Lee's Hulk, and obviously like Nolan's Batman trilogy. And I think pretty much the rest of them, with like a few exceptions here and there, like the first Iron Man,
Thor Ragnarok,
Thor Ragnarok, even Kenneth Branagh's Thor, the first one, and I would say like the first Guardians of the Galaxy. Like there's like a few of those there where you're like, yes, this is like I'm watching a film that's come from an interesting, unique voice, and I don't feel necessarily the big hand of the studio forcing X, Y, and Z to happen here.
Would you also put Tim Burton in that category with the
absolutely? Yeah, sorry, I can't believe I forgot Burton there. And even Schumacher, who like whatever you think of those movies, like only Joel Schumacher could have made those
that
movies.
Batman is Joel Schumacher's Batman, the bat nipples. No, I mean like it's fun to poke fun at that, but that was his take, love it or hate it. And even if you don't like it, I think, what Keith said about Spider-Man 3, I mean, Batman and Robin is fun bad, at least it's like watchable and fun. You can, have a good time watching it ironically. And yeah, I don't want to bash Joel Schumacher since he recently passed away. And I enjoy a lot of his movies too. I mean, I watched Phone Booth the other day and I really like that movie.
Yeah, Phone Booth. I'm like, oh man, I really want to rewatch that now. I saw that movie on VHS like a million years ago, and I remember being like, this is cool. Yeah. Like, look at what you can do. It's so little.
Another very of its times, early 2000s movie.
Oh yeah.
Quick side note: I found it very disappointing that a lot of major Hollywood, like Variety and Hollywood Reporter, like Batman director Joel Schumacher dies. I'm like, he owned the 80s and early 90s. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. He should have been remembered. Like he's more than just Batman, and that was I just found that very like he.
I agree.
He was such a trendsetter in the 80s.
What would be really funny is if when God forbid, I hope he's healthy and fine. But like, could you imagine if when George Clooney died, they were like, Batman actor George Clooney
I bet there's
died.
going to be some. I bet there's going to be some.
That would be insane. Just to bring it back around full circle.
Yeah.
So, with we mentioned that Spider-Man is very of its time, early 2000s. Do you think? I mean, I know, Keith, we've talked about this before, but I guess some of the special effects don't hold up as well. But is that even a fair thing to criticize the movie for? If the that was maybe what was available at the time, should we hold it against it for what's been better now?
I think it depends. Like, if you're looking at it and you're like, this technology is inferior, like, that's not really a fair criticism. It's it's what they had.
You were a robot critic.
Could do. Yeah, it's more like, what are they doing with the technology, and like, was that a good decision? Should they have done something else? And I mean, for me, the effects that don't hold up as well are when it's clearly like a CG like stunt double like flying through New York. Like, that's the stuff that doesn't hold up as well. The rest of the stuff pretty much works for me. But even when I'm like looking at that, I'm like, this was what they had. The shot compositions themselves, the way the camera moves, the way the music swells, the way the scene is edited, like, all of that stuff still works, and the emotion is there, so therefore, like, everything works around the effect, and therefore the effect doesn't age that badly, other than it's just technological inferiority, and what we have become accustomed to instead.
I think it's fun to have a laugh at, just because we're watching it on Blu-rays and everything else, and I always think the parade scene, especially when the guy, like, that's when it could be a little jonky.
That's true. That scene.
But
isn't so
John Dykstra, who did the visual effects, he's the reason, like, we have lightsabers. As you said, Adam, they gave it their all for this. They made the reason for. They wanted, when he's swinging through the city, they wanted to look like a dance in the sky, and the contraptions that they used to make the camera just go like free fall. I just think it worked well, and they definitely improved in the sequel because he won an Oscar for the sequel. This movie won movie won its Oscars as well, but they definitely, like, how can we be better? How can we make this movie better? And I don't fault it for the story, because that was I think, aside from like Superman with Christopher Reeves, this is the classic, first hours, the origin story, which they nailed. They got everything right with that. And then the second half, you can, I don't fault it for that story.
Let's talk about the story a little bit. Like, so I think in trying to think about that, like, audience score, I was trying to, like, ask myself, okay, what hasn't aged well? And like, within the first 30 seconds, I was like, oh, this is what hasn't aged well, is when in the voiceover he goes, like all good stories, this is a story about a girl.
Okay, yeah.
And I was just like, oh no, is that what this movie is? Like,
it's not,
for whatever reason, like, that is not what I remember it being. And I'll just kind of go ahead and say that I think that, like, that part hasn't aged well, because when the way it sets up this love triangle between Harry, Peter, and Mary Jane is sort of this, like, classic sort of like love triangle that, like, never ages well in any form, where it's essentially, like, I think the crystallization of it for me is when Harry says to Peter, well, you never made a move. And it's sort of this weird implication that, like, Mary Jane doesn't actually have a choice in who she's dating here. It's just whichever one of them decided they wanted to first. Yeah. And I think that is, like, gross and, like, not great. I think, we can say that's of its time. You can also say that at the end of the movie, Mary Jane does kind of reclaim some of her agency. She, like, definitively decides to leave Harry, intending to, be with Peter. Although even then, when she is saying to him at the end of the movie, like, there's only one man who's always been there, like, for me throughout, like, my whole life. And I'm just like, well, technically he was in fact there. But the film makes it very clear early on that even though Peter is harboring this, like, long-standing feeling of love for her, they've not done much interacting until like the midpoint of this movie.
Yeah, no, that's true. If anything, he's there kind of from a creepy point of view because he can look into her bedroom.
Not so great.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of, to use some more modern nomenclature, I'm like, oh, he's a little bit of an incel.
I wouldn't go that far.
I do believe there's someone recut this movie and made it into a horror, like a stalker movie. Like he pops out of her work. It's like, hey, Mary Jane, I was just like hanging out.
Oh, that's true.
I was just in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's not great.
And Mary Jane herself is not that much of a character, and I think she gets saved about like 4 times in this movie. I completely
and then the whole franchise she gets saved probably like 20 times or so. Just by the time she gets kidnapped in the 3rd movie, it's like all right already.
Well, but that is, I mean, that's the challenge of being both Peter Parker and Spider-Man, though, right? And like, the best Spider-Man stories are also great Peter Parker stories, and like that's why Spider-Man can't have a girlfriend, because then that person is at risk. That's why she's always getting kidnapped all the time, is because in every movie one of the villains figures out who his secret identity is, figures out who he loves, and then uses that to threaten him. Which again is sort of like why I end up loving Peter Parker and this character so much, is because being Spider-Man and being Peter Parker are always at odds with each other. I think one of my favorite sort of moments in Spider-Man is in the animated series. There is this one episode where he and Peter Parker, Mary Jane, and Aunt May are at like a cocktail party or something, and some villain attacks and like the whole thing goes nuts, and he immediately disappears, turns into Spider-Man, saves everyone at the party, including physically saving Aunt May and Mary Jane. And once he's done saving everyone, he runs away, puts his regular clothes back on, he comes out and he's like, hey, I'm back, and they're just like, you left us. Like, why would you leave us like that? Like, we had to wait for Spider-Man to come and save us because you left us. I'm just like, that pain of like of the conflict between the two sides of himself. That's what makes this character so good.
Yeah, it's you see at the end, it's kind of like the biggest, maybe like the payoff for that character growth is when he rejects Mary Jane at the end.
Yes.
That's kind of I think that's like a smart choice. I feel like maybe I think it's almost even like a daring choice, because like it's about so many movies, so many American movies, it's about the guy getting the girl. So for the guy to turn her, for him to turn her away at the end, I think is a really good understanding of the character and a good way to leave off the movie.
But that makes the sequel all the more better when it does pay off.
Exactly. It's more earned that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it also Mary Jane, Aunt May is also in danger, right? And a moment that I've always kind of raised an eyebrow is when she gets attacked by Green Goblin and he makes her finish the prayer. It's like, that's so like silly to me. But I feel like this movie has like just a lot of like quick little moments that I kind of like raise an eyebrow to, just throughout. It's quirky, and that's the charm.
It's funny. Like I'm trying, like, what I'm like, I know I like that. I don't know why I like that.
It's so like who thinks of that? Like, finish the prayer.
And then like I can hear like in like a soundbite. Like there's a couple of like sound bites from this movie that play in my head for the last like almost 20 years. One of them being her yelling out, "Deliver us!" Like that. Like that's been in my head for 20 years. The other big one, which amazingly I have not been divorced yet, but at least once a week I turn to my wife when we're in bed and I go, "Sleep."
Yeah. That's a silly thing. You just go sleep. And then in the next scene, when Spider-Man is like waking up and like Green Goblin, it's like, "Wake up, Spider." He has this thing where he like kind of like slaps the back of Peter's head and leans down like, "Let me tell you something, kid." And like that's also so silly. Like it was a tense moment. All of a sudden, the Green Goblin is just like, it looks like he's about to give him the birds and the bees talk or something. It's just like,
he's theatrical.
Yeah, no.
All good villains have a little theatricality to them.
Yeah, I suppose. But I just thought that was like that image of Green Goblin kind of like sitting there, like leaning back
when he's
casually.
weirdly like he's leaning on the like air vent, and you're just like, you can't bend in that costume.
Yeah, that's probably why.
He's hanging out like a cool kid. But Adam, I think you said it perfectly. Why I think the audience score is surprisingly lower than any of us anticipated. You don't know why you like it, and some people like if you like it, it's like I know I like it. Some people like they don't go for the corniness, they don't go for and that's okay.
Well, I don't think it's corny. Like, so I
Campy.
I kind of do.
Campy is the word.
Yeah. Well, like, yeah. I know why I like it if it refers to the movie. In regards to why do I like Aunt May screaming the end of that prayer, I actually don't know. I don't know why I like that, other than it being like a very compelling performance and a very heightened scene.
Yeah.
Why I like the movie, aside from it just being about characters I like, is that it, again, going back to that idea of like authorship and authorship and feeling the director on screen, like this is just unabashedly a Sam Raimi film. Sam Raimi is one of my guys. I love like pretty much his whole filmography. But I like that there is no irony here. Which I think is what you need in a film about Peter Parker. Because Peter Parker is this like nerd who takes school and he takes school seriously. He's sensitive.
He's a very genuine character.
He's very genuine. Yeah, he's very genuine, and it's okay for Spider-Man to be snarky, but like Peter Parker is a genuine guy, and this film is a genuine film. It's not poking fun at any of what's happening on screen.
It's sweet.
And I think that's really important.
There's some sweet.
Yeah, there's a sweetness
to it.
There's some
sweet lines like when I think Aunt May's in the hospital and Peter has this like little monologue for Mary Jane. It is like a romantic kind of thing there.
I laughed though. It's kind of over the top, but it's kind of funny, the monologue itself.
And like there are some dramatic moments throughout the whole thing. I mean, my favorite moment dramatically in all three movies is when Peter confesses to Aunt May about the night Uncle Ben dies, and she does not take it well. That is like a very strong and believable scene, and I like how that movie does go there. So there is, you're right. I guess that element of irony is not necessarily in this movie, which is interesting because so many Sam Raimi things do have that campy irony to it. Like, what I was watching a couple years ago? Xena. I was watching a couple episodes of Xena, the Warrior Princess.
Oh, that's right.
He was an executive producer on that. That is like the campiest thing, and that show ended just like a year before this movie came out.
And Lucy Lawless.
Campy doesn't necessarily mean it's ironic though.
Okay.
But would be my one point there. And this movie is campy. Like there is a lot of camp to this movie, but I think it's not just the Sam Raimi of it. It's that he's trying to evoke like comic books. Like comic books are inherently campy.
Well, and then you have those really tight zoom-ins, it feels like a moment out of a comic book. Like when Willem Dafoe's like, unconscious in the experiment, then he wakes up, you have that,
and the eyes.
Yeah, there's like moments that it seems like that's what it looks like to take a comic book and put it in motion.
Yes, and it's exactly that. It's when you're looking at like a page in a comic book, you've got essentially the wide shot of a character and then a box right next to it with a close up on something else. That's exactly what he's doing, and it also feels exactly like many of the shots in Evil Dead, right? Like he's been doing crash zooms forever, and then inspires like another one of my favorite directors, Edgar Wright. Like so much of his oeuvre and his aesthetic is taken from these early Sam Raimi films.
Well, it's a very distinct sort of move, and it's timed perfectly because it really intensifies the scene when it needs it.
And I just my last point on that, I need to just very quickly fact check myself before I complete this sentence, but I just don't want us to move on from it until I've said it. I don't know what just happened. I tried to IMDb something, and now it's showing me photos of Asa Butterfield in the TV show Merlin, which is not what I'm searching for. So I'm just going to quickly pull it up on my phone. But the thing I was going to say, the other connection between Raimi and Edgar Wright is that Bill Pope, I believe, is the DP on this film. Let me just...
I don't know if you guys know this, but Lucy Lawless does cameo in this movie.
What? Where?
Who does Lucy Lawless play? in
She
this film?
plays the girl in the. I discovered it last time, so I was able to catch on it this time. She is the girl in the montage, smoking, going like Spider-Man. He's kind of cute.
That's her. Oh man, a man with 8 legs sounds hot.
Yeah.
Oh man, I could totally see
That
it now.
rules.
And I love that whole montage too. I mean, that has the line, "You like stinks. I don't like
It
them."
stinks. I think
That's Jim
Norton.
Yeah.
I think the use of extras in this movie and the background characters. Hey, we get Octavia Spencer. She stealing
Yes,
that one
that's
scene.
right.
Like, all right, you're.
Well, even Bruce Campbell, he appears in all 3 movies.
Name
And-
Spider-Man.
Well, he's Raimi's guy.
Yeah, exactly. It's a nice touch for people who are, familiar with his filmography. I'm sure a lot of Evil Dead fans were happy to see him pop up.
Of course. And so just real quickly back to the cinematographer. Bill Pope did not shoot this Spider-Man, but Bill Pope shot Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3. He also shot The Matrix and invented bullet time cinematography. But then went on to shoot a couple of Edgar Wright's films, most recently Baby Driver.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us.
Finish it! Finish it!
So, just trying to think with this movie, any other aspects here? I mean, you're just trying to get the whole Spider-Man powers down, right? I mean, you also have some of those shots of the Spidey sense, which are, classic. And you see, I don't know, I can't remember any scenes in the third movie, but I know in the second movie they bring that back with the Spidey sense. And those are...
In Spider-Man 2, I feel like it's very specifically doing the Bill Pope bullet time cinematography. He has the sense, and then the camera often swings around him in slow motion.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you want to see, the Peter Parker's perspective when the Spidey sense kicks in.
In this third one, it happens in the first 5 minutes. Peter Parker's walking on the street, and all of a sudden the spider sense goes off, and he's tracked by Harry Osborn. I do like that sequence, and he's trying to catch the ring.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the better sequences in that film.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think we all really enjoy this Spider-Man movie, obviously. But do you want to maybe say what other movies you would say contest for the best Spider-Man movie?
Yeah, I'll give you my official ranking.
Okay.
And I have it here because I've already done. I've seen all the Spider-Man and I've already done this.
Sure.
Essentially. So in first place I have Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2.
Yep.
In second place I have Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. In third place I have Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, the movie we're currently talking about, which was my number 2 Spider-Man for since Spider-Man 2 came out, I guess, up until Spider-Verse came out. After that, I've got Homecoming, then Far From Home, Spider-Man 3, and then the 2 Garfield films.
Yeah.
I want to hear your guys' ranking, but I wonder if you might let me give a quick little spiel on my beef with the representation of Spider-Man in the MCU.
Okay, yeah, let's hear it.
So, first of all, I do really dig those movies, and I really like Tom Holland in that role. I think that the inclusion of the CGI pieces in order to give him emotionality while he is wearing the suit is a really incredible idea. I think that those Spider-Man movies, or really just the first one, do an excellent job of actually portraying what Queens looks like, and not just physically, but the demographic in Queens. I like that is a movie with a more diverse cast, because when you look at this movie, everyone's white except for there's some extras and side characters, and there's some wide shots where you're that looks like a group of people in New York, but for the most part this does not represent the numerous cultures and peoples that live in New York, which I think is a missed opportunity. My main beef with the MCU version of Spider-Man is that because they did not want to repeat this movie, and they certainly didn't want to repeat the Garfield films, and have the same origin story and show us Uncle Ben dying and show us the with great power stuff. Instead, they used Tony Stark for that. that's interesting. That's okay. My main problem with that, though, is that you then take Spider-Man, who is essentially like a working class hero, who like fights for the people of New York, right? And in Spider-Man Homecoming, you have him very specifically defending the wealth of a weapons manufacturing billionaire against that. I mean, like, granted, Vulture is doing bad things. He's also like one of the most sympathetic villains in the MCU, like, and I would maybe like only second to Killmonger, Michael B. Jordan's character in Black Panther, where he's a construction worker who got screwed doubly by said weapons manufacturing billionaire. So you're turning him into this like inversion, this, I would say, unfortunate inversion of what he should be representing. And to take things even further, in Far From Home, which I wish didn't take place outside of New York, because quite frankly, like, Spider-Man doesn't work unless he's surrounded by skyscrapers, because his powers rely on being able to shoot webs into tall buildings. You have him then further sort of like his whole arc ends up becoming defined by Tony Stark. And it's just really not what Spider-Man should be, in my opinion. Like, I would love if he was fighting, like, none of the villains that they've had Spider-Man go up against in the MCU are rooted in Spider-Man. They're barely rooted in Peter Parker. What they are rooted in is Tony Stark. And that, I think, is a really unfortunate way of portraying the character, because yes, you have moments where, like, oh no, he realizes the Vulture is his girlfriend's dad, and finally it becomes a Peter Parker problem. But, like, you know, true Spider-Man stories, that's not how it goes.
Right. Well,
that's my little spiel.
That's it. I never thought of it that way. You know, defending the wealth of Tony Stark. Which, yeah, I guess that is what he's doing.
That's literally all he's doing. He's defending the theft of stuff from Stark.
That's what he does at the end. But I feel like for a lot of the movie, he's trying to stop the distribution of these weapons in Queens. So
yes, and that works. That's all really cool.
Yeah, and but yeah, I guess that's like the climactic twist at the end. It's he's robbing Tony Stark. And I think I think the inclusion of Iron Man in Spider-Man has to partly do with the fact that there are no Iron Man movies.
It's a business deal.
There are no Iron Man movies in Phase 3, so they have to give him other movies to appear in. So I don't know. What do you think, Keith?
I do think, with Spider-Man villains, it's kind of tricky because a majority of his villains are rob-a-bank thugs. Sandman, like either Mysterio's a rob-a-bank thug, but with illusions, and that's in the comics and animated show. And I think in both cases they did something. They wanted to do something interesting, and it just happened to be Tony Stark. It kind of makes me happy hearing that Tony Stark is kind of done out of the MCU. Hopefully, I hope they don't find a way to bring him back, except for maybe
a zombie,
a flashback or something like that. But I'm predicting, and we can timestamp this. I think like Kraven would make a great villain in the third one. If we all know who Spider-Man is now, I think Kraven is solely like a unique villain that could be Spider-Man. And I do hope, like, I don't understand the full contract between Sony and Disney with Spider-Man characters, but Norman himself could make a great major like antagonist in the phases going onward. Not even Green Goblin. I think Norman Osborn itself is just a great character in the comics that could translate well to the screen. It's going to be very different from Willem Dafoe's. I'm already prepared for that. And Doc Ock, I haven't played the game, but I've seen enough. Like, I've had to watch some of it on YouTube to just be like, to understand the relationship.
Osborn is also a chief villain in that game.
That I did not know. But
not Green Goblin. There's no Green Goblin in that game, but there is Norman Osborn.
I think at least with Homecoming, it's just a kid trying to stop weapons, and Tony Stark is his hero. I understand, and maybe he could just. There could be development. We're gonna get like a Harry Potter, a lot of Spider-Man movies, probably of him growing up. So maybe he could at one point be angry at Tony Stark, Like I would
You know-
love. I would know. I like you're angry.
I just think it's funny that in this movie the villain is a weapons manufacturer, and in Spider-Man: Homecoming he's defending the wealth of a weapons
Well, that
manufacturer.
is Tony Stark, though. Like in the first Iron Man movie, he's like the weapons manufacturer, like supplying to the military, and then he has like guilt and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I never made that connection before, but now I totally see it. I kick out of too with Oscorp how everything is green in the factory.
Yeah.
Like this really are hinting at who this guy becomes. Everything is green. This
know.
is the green company. Even the graphics.
And it's such an intense green.
Yeah. Very even like the computer, everything has to be in green.
With your list, Adam, I think I'm the same list, except I would switch 3 and 4 for like Spider-Man 3. See, Spider-Verse is so good, but Spider-Man 2 holds a special place in my heart of just being one of the best superhero movies.
Just nothing's gonna beat that.
But it's too good.
Spider-Man: Homecoming probably does come in 3 for me, and then Spider-Man, and then I really enjoyed. They got Mysterio in a way that I wanted him on screen, and the scenes with him.
Cool villain.
Very cool villain, played by Nightcrawler, like Jake Gyllenhaal, and yeah, and I know why the Amazing Spider-Man movies, reading the notes, the studio notes with that, I know why they amplified stuff way too much or didn't really cover it or wanted to avoid it at all, that it ended up being just like a millennial carbon copy of the Raimi Spider-Man, and they just couldn't pull it off.
Yeah, I have a confession to make. I have not seen the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies because I thought it was too soon since, the third one had come out. And I know people didn't like that one, but I was like, another Spider-Man? No, I was like so against the idea of another Spider-Man like franchise that I just refused to see them. And then I guess I warmed up to the idea by the time Tom Holland's Spider-Man movies came about. And I do like those. I like Homecoming a lot. I just don't know why, but Far From Home didn't do it for me, and I need to see it again because I only saw it once in theaters. But something about that movie just like I don't know, just didn't work for me. And I feel like I have to see it again to really figure out why. But that was my natural reaction. I'm like, I don't think I'll go back to that one as much as Homecoming.
I kind of walked out of the theater on that one, and I was like, wow, I had a really good time. And that's it.
Yeah.
Like I didn't I had no, like I was just like, I have nothing really else to say about this movie. And there's a lot about it that I think really works. Mostly it comes down to like character performances, like the acting in that movie, like everyone's really, working. For me, it's like, stop taking Spider-Man out of New York. Like I want to see him in the city. Like my favorite moment in that whole movie was like the final like shots of the film where he's swinging around Midtown with Mary Jane.
Yeah,
like that's the best stuff. I really didn't love that Mary Jane figures out who he is so quickly. I mean, it's obvious who he is. Like so on the other hand, like she wouldn't seem all that intelligent if she didn't figure it out. But I just think that the main conflict of Spider-Man is this Peter Parker v. Spider-Man thing, and you take that away in like almost, very early on in his second solo film. It's just, and Aunt May knows who he is too,
and May
right?
finds out
Like,
at the end of the Homecoming movie. Yeah,
so I think that if you strip that out of Spider-Man, I'm not really sure what you're left with. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with the character.
I think that's what matters.
You find the danger of the two Spider-Man and Peter Parker becoming one and the same. Like you don't distinguish between the two. And yeah, that is an issue because every great superhero franchise that's Bruce Wayne versus Batman, Clark Kent versus Superman. That's such an interesting dichotomy. You really shouldn't erase that.
It is decidedly not a large piece of conflict in any of the MCU films. Simply because in that first Iron Man film, Downey Jr. improvises that "I am Iron Man" line. They think it rules, they keep it in. And as a result, none of the superhero movies that we get in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with the exception of, I guess, 96% of the first Spider-Man film, like Secret Identity is not anyone's like source of conflict.
Yeah, Doctor Strange is just Doctor Strange, Everyone knows Captain America, everyone knows who everyone is, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's another point that I guess maybe I don't know if they felt that that's been done already. I'm not sure, But that's interesting. That's not really a theme at all in any of those movies.
If we could have one movie where I do appreciate, and I know they're trying to not recreate Raimi's Spider-Man, but they took a chance on not having him in New York, and they with the genres they've been going through with this Spider-Man, the first one being like that team rom-com style, like John Hughes, and this one being a teen Euro trip style. Like you even like Martin Starr and JB Smoove are playing like those. They're right out of like they're so good, but they're right out of like early 2000 Euro trip type movies. I'm okay with them doing something different with this, and I know like Spidey is New York, but it's that one I've heard that criticism, and I'm like they tried something, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do in the third one. As it all depends, it all depends with what they do.
Remember, like there was a thing last year, when it seemed like Disney and Sony were not going to extend their deal, and that would be it for Spider-Man in the MCU, and I didn't know how that was going to work, because like, are they going to just now erase him out of the MCU storyline, or are they going to now just have him appear in the Venom movie? Like I wasn't sure what was going to happen there, and I still don't know what they're going to do with him, but I would have been at least curious to see how that would have played out if that still was an ongoing conflict.
I honestly would have been excited to see that, given my essential beef with the MCU version of Spider-Man is the way that he's forced to interact with the legacy of the MCU.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole idea. Everything is so integrated now. By now, and in that franchise, you can't really have like one character be totally separate from everyone else unless it's Thor on some planet that we haven't even heard of. But if it's Spider-Man on Earth,
right?
He has, it's already been integrated.
I think that Sam Raimi's Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is going to be like sort of like the key that unlocks the next phase of superhero storytelling for us, where they're going to dive into all of that kind of stuff, and they're going to create situations where people can come and go from the main storyline of the MCU and create individual stories without that baggage, because they'll be able to either say this is they could even go as far as being like, here's a Spider-Man movie starring Tom Holland. It exists completely outside of the continuity because it's a multiverse where there are no other superheroes. Mm-hmm. Like they could very easily do that for all we know. And they could also take the Spider-Man we know and love and push him to a universe where it's he's maintaining all his memories, etc. But he's in a new place where Iron Man never existed and New York looks very different.
They could do that. I think Tobey Maguire is going to find himself. I could totally see both Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield voicing themselves in Spider-Verse 2. If I had to put like a $25 chip on.
Tobey Maguire was supposed to. He was supposed to have a cameo in the first one.
I didn't know that, but I could totally see that happening in the sequel, and I could totally see him popping up again in the Doctor Strange sequel. I could.
Now, for the record, I think my Spider-Man rankings are pretty much the same as yours, except I don't even include the Garfield ones because I haven't even seen them, so it would not even be fair for me to like rank and assess them. But yeah, I think it's 2 is just something that's special for all of us. The second one, and it's just interesting. We're talking about all these other movies that have come out since then, the whole MCU, and I think we all agree that it kind of all started here with this first Spider-Man movie, and
agreed.
I don't think anyone could have possibly predicted all the doors of possibilities that this movie unlocked.
Hey! Unlock the thing! Take the chain off!
Hey, Freak Show! You're going nowhere! I got you for 3 minutes! 3 minutes of playtime! What are you doing up there?
Staying away from you.
So with that said, I think, like I said, we all kind of are agreeing. But what score would you give this movie on a percentage level, Adam? What would you say?
It's really hard to say. Like, I have an easier time doing like the star rating, so to speak.
Okay.
So for me, this is like an order. It's a 4.5 out of 5, like hands down, no problem. And then Spider-Verse and Spider-Man 2 are both 5 out of 5. So I guess that makes this like a 90%. Like if we're talking 4.5 out of 5. But then I'm like, You know what? I think it's a 90%. But then I want to like dock like 3 percentage points for the opening voiceover of this like all stories is a story about a girl, and just like MJ's general lack of like agency throughout the film, and also like the lack of diversity in the film. I think like has aged poorly, but like even then, like I think you have to like mention those things. It doesn't make me go like burn it down. Like, you know, this movie is still always going to be something I feel nostalgia for and like want to watch like at least once a year. I'll just say there are like 2 movies on my shelf that basically like literally any day of the week I could put them on, have a great time, and like feel a lot better about my life. One of them is this movie, and one of them is Jurassic Park.
Okay, definitely classics that are just, you know, I don't want, maybe you could say crowd pleasers, but I mean they're more than that. You know, they just did so much for their respective genres. So those do go hand in hand if you think about it that way.
Yeah.
What would you say, Keith? What would your percentage be?
I looked at it. I remember the feelings I had walking out when I was 11, 12. And now with all the film knowledge and criticism that I've gained over the past 20 years, it's I think no doubt Sam Raimi stuck the landing with this, and he only improved on it with the sequel, and he had the third one. He did his thing with the third one. I am going to give this an 85. I can get some of the. See, for Adam, for me, this isn't like if it's on or every time I'm going to watch this movie, I'm gonna have a good time. But it's not a movie it's not one of my go-to films personally. I think the other 3 Spider-Man movies above it on my list are like Homecoming 2 and now Spider-Verse are just really make me love this character even more. But yeah, no, I think this movie gets the things about Spider-Man right and is amplified by some fantastic performances, some, at the time, groundbreaking CGI, a great score, and yeah, I think the legacy of this film, both the ironic memes, the camp, the background characters, I think this trilogy just puts a smile on my face.
Yeah. You know, this movie was like the quintessential, like, you know, saw it with the family. We couldn't stop talking about it. We got it on DVD as soon as it was out on DVD. We watched it at home together. You know, it was like a staple in the Fulcaraccio household. And then, you know, the second one became even more so that. I kind of lean more towards you, Keith, but the 85, just because I feel like, you know, maybe the characters just get expanded upon so much more in the second one. Because I would put the second one at like above a 90.
Yes.
You know, I just want to leave enough room for the second one to go up.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm sticking with that one. And I just remembered something. I would be remiss if I did not mention a particular character in this first one that I think is near and dear to some of our friends' hearts. The infamous Bonesaw.
Yes.
Bonesaw. Bonesaw's ready.
McGraw. Got you for 3 minutes.
Bonesaw McGraw.
3 minutes.
I didn't catch
playtime.
until this viewing that he had a last name, but his name is Bonesaw McGraw.
Amazing. It's like little touches like that. Like they get in. What was that? Randy Savage? Is that who that was?
Yes. Yeah, Macho Man Randy Savage.
Oh man, amazing.
Bonesaw is ready.
Just an unbelievably memorable moment in comic book history. Yeah, Bonesaw. Like, oh man. That
Oh, you are reminding me though that I do need to dock another point for homophobia.
I knew you. That line.
Oh, did your husband make that for you?
That line does stick out, and I was like, oh, 2002.
It ages very, very badly. The only way for me to forgive that line on any level is for me to put in my head canon that. Spider-Man isn't being homophobic because he's a homophobic person. Spider-Man is looking at someone who is so addicted to their own performative masculinity that he knows the only way to get under his skin is to do something homophobic. And that's the only way I can justify that scene. I still don't like it.
Well, you know what? I'll tell you this. I was not offended, and I could see if other people were, but I think that's what he said. I think is what you were hinting at, Adam. I think he's just like undermining Bonesaw's masculinity, and that's something you don't want to do if you're in the cage with Bonesaw for 3 minutes of playtime.
The one
just wanted to bring that up. I think some of our friends would actually grill us if we did not bring up that character before wrapping this up.
Agreed.
So with that though, I don't think we need to average our scores. I think it's pretty clear that we are siding with the critics on Spider-Man. Funny enough, I think the third one is divided in the reverse direction, where or maybe it's the same way. I have to look into that. But I think the third one is also divided, but that one's been lampooned a bunch of times. And I feel like this, I'd rather speak positively on this franchise than negatively on the weaker part.
I think you'll have a good time watching Spider-Man 3. The dance is iconic now. It's in Spider-Verse.
It's unbelievable that exists.
Spider-Man 3 is for me the tragedy of Spider-Man 3 is just that it feels like a missed opportunity that just doesn't live up to the potential of the second movie. But this is the other thing though with Raimi, is that his third movie in a trilogy is always going to be more campy than anything else, and like that's what Army of Darkness, Spider-Man 3, like. I think it's a very fair sort of comparison.
And he didn't want to do he didn't want to do Venom, so I think he just didn't know what to do with Venom.
I kind of love that performance though.
From what's his name?
From Topher Grace.
Topher Grace. Yeah, I don't know. The thing about that movie, even at the time, I think that was one of the first times where I walked out of the theater as a kid being like, I don't think that was that good. Like I kind of questioned whether the movie was good or not, and I was disappointed.
But the making
I think that was the first movie I believe that I drove myself to the theater to see. I think I believe it came out like right after I got my driver's license, and I remember like it was like that for me and my friends in high school, that was one of the coolest things about being able to drive, was we can drive to the multiplex and see movies. And so I remember when one of my good friends got his license and he was like, I'm going to drive us to see Cloverfield. And it was like this big exciting day. And then when it was my turn, it was Spider-Man 3.
Right on. A little personal victory too with the Spider-Man franchise though. That was a year of threes. That came out the same year as Pirates of the Caribbean 3 and Shrek 3. And I remember thinking like, oh, I hope Spider-Man beats those other movies. And it did. So even though it's not as good, it still, beat them at the box office. So
it was my first midnight showing. It was my first midnight show. I was so excited for it. And I think only one person clapped, and I can argue, and maybe it was me just having no idea. Like, I think I was more excited just to see a movie at midnight. But I remember the audience reaction to Sandman's origin. I still think that's one of the most brilliant things, and the special effects behind that. I think it took 2-3 years to make. But his creation is one of my
at the time.
It's such a highlight.
It was cool. That was probably the highlight of the movie.
It's like a great short film.
That was one of those movies. I remember in the 2000s, there were all these movies where I had like these moments from like, whoa, they can do this now with like CGI. Yeah. I think that was a moment for me too. I was like, whoa, like this is like so cool. We can do this now. I bet even my parents though. My parents love everything, and even after Spider-Man 3, I remember my mom saying like, there weren't enough scenes of him swinging around the city. Like even they kind of had some qualms with it. I'm like, oh wow, like they love everything usually. But we'll always love this first Spider-Man movie. And we'll always defend it and spread that love. So thank you, Adam, for, again, like making this recording possible.
Thank you so much, man.
No problem.
Joining us here to talk about Spider-Man. And
thanks for having me.
Hopefully we can have more remote recording soon to get more divided film discussions out there. So until then, thanks again, guys, for listening. And tune in soon for more Divided Films.